My phone buzzed just as I finished packing my overnight bag. I smiled, expecting a message from my younger sister about the wedding schedule. Instead, I saw my father's name on the screen. "Don't come to your sister's wedding. The guest list is final." I read the message 3 times, convinced I had misunderstood it. Then another message appeared. "This is what's best for the family." For a long moment, I couldn't breathe. Just a week earlier, Dad had asked me to arrive early to help him set up the reception hall. We had laughed over old memories while choosing songs for the father-daughter dance. Nothing seemed wrong, so what had changed? I called him immediately. The phone rang, then it went to voicemail. I tried again. Voicemail. My sister didn't answer either, neither did my mother. It was as if my entire family had disappeared overnight. I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at the screen, wondering what I had done to deserve this. Then my best friend Emma called. "Weren't you supposed to be on the road already?" I forced a laugh. "I don't think I'm invited anymore." There was silence. "What do you mean?" I read Dad's message aloud. Emma was furious. "That doesn't even sound like him." "I know. So what are you going to do?" I looked at the framed photo on my dresser. It was taken 15 years earlier. Dad had his arm around me after my high school graduation. He had always called me his greatest achievement. Now he didn't even want me at my own sister's wedding. "I guess I'll stay home." Emma stopped me. "No." "What? You'll regret that for the rest of your life." I frowned. If your father truly wants you gone, then hearing it face to face will hurt. But if someone is lying or manipulating him, you'll never know unless you go. Her words stayed with me long after we ended the call. That night, I barely slept. Every possible explanation raced through my mind. Had my sister blamed me for something? Had someone spread a lie? Had Dad changed after all these years? By sunrise, I had made my decision. I wasn't going to ruin the wedding. I wasn't going to make a scene, but I was going to look my father in the eyes and ask him one simple question. Why? I picked up my suit bag, grabbed my car keys, and started driving toward the church. I had no idea that by the end of the day, one unexpected guest, walking through those church doors beside me, would reveal a family secret that had been hidden for more than 20 years. And nothing in our lives would ever be the same. My dad texted me, "Don't come to your sister's wedding." Then he saw who walked in beside me. The message arrived at exactly 7:14 p.m., just as I zipped my garment bag shut. "Dad, don't come to your sister's wedding. It's better if you stay away." I stared at the screen, waiting for the punchline. Another message appeared. "Please respect my decision. This is what's best for the family." I read the words over and over, hoping they would somehow change. They didn't. My name is Ethan Carter, and until that moment, I believed my family was unbreakable. I called my dad immediately, straight to voicemail. I called again. Nothing. Then I called my younger sister, Olivia. The phone rang 6 times before the call ended. No answer. My mother didn't answer either. Within 5 minutes, every member of my family had gone silent. It didn't make sense. Just 3 days earlier, Dad had asked me to give a speech during the reception. He'd even joked that I'd probably embarrass Olivia with stories from our childhood. Everything had seemed normal. So why wasn't I welcome anymore? I sat on the couch for nearly an hour, replaying every conversation I'd had over the past few weeks. Had I offended someone? Forgotten something important? Nothing explained this. My phone buzzed again. It wasn't Dad. It was my best friend, Daniel. "You packed yet?" he asked cheerfully. I couldn't even pretend. "I don't think I'm going anymore." "What?" I read Dad's message aloud. There was a long silence. Finally, Daniel spoke. "That doesn't sound like your father." "I know. So either something happened, or someone wants you gone." His words settled heavily in my mind. Someone wants you gone. I hadn't considered that possibility. "Go," Daniel said firmly. "What? Go to the wedding?" Dad told me not to. And if that text wasn't really his decision? I frowned. What if someone convinced him? What if he's protecting someone? What if you're being blamed for something you don't even know about? I wanted to argue. Instead, I found myself staring at the framed family photo on my bookshelf. It had been taken 12 years earlier. Dad had his arm around my shoulders. Olivia was laughing because I'd accidentally dropped birthday cake all over my new suit. Mom had been smiling behind the camera. Looking at that picture, it was impossible to believe we had become strangers. "I'll go," I whispered, "but I won't cause a scene." The next morning, I left before sunrise. The drive to the church took almost 4 hours. Every mile gave me more time to imagine the worst. Maybe Dad had changed. Maybe Olivia truly didn't want me there. Maybe I'd already lost my family. By the time I reached the church parking lot, guests were already arriving. Luxury cars lined both sides of the entrance. Everyone looked happy. I suddenly felt like I didn't belong. I stayed inside my car for several minutes, trying to decide whether to leave. Then someone knocked on my window. I looked up. An elderly woman stood there, wearing a simple navy blue dress. Her silver hair was tied neatly behind her head, and although I'd never seen her before, something about her eyes felt strangely familiar. She smiled kindly. "You must be Ethan." "I'm sorry. Do I know you?" She shook her head. "No. Then how do you know my name?" She looked toward the church before answering. "I've waited a very long time to meet you. Every instinct told me something unusual was happening. I'm Margaret." The name meant nothing to me. "I'm afraid you've mistaken me for someone else." "I haven't." She reached into her purse and carefully removed an old photograph. It showed a young version of my father standing beside the same woman. Both of them were smiling. Dad looked barely 20 years old. "What is this?" "I knew your father many years ago." "You were friends?" A faint smile crossed her face. "We were much more than friends." I looked from the photograph back to her face. My stomach tightened. "I don't understand." "You will." Before I could ask another question, church bells began ringing. Guests started walking toward the entrance. Margaret looked at me calmly. "Would you mind walking inside with me?" I hesitated. "If your father sees us together, he needs to." There was something in her voice that made it impossible to refuse. Together, we walked toward the church doors. As we stepped inside, conversations slowly faded. One by one, people turned to look at us. Then I saw my father. He had been laughing with relatives only seconds earlier. Now the color drained from his face. His hands began shaking. "Dad?" He wasn't looking at me. He was staring at Margaret. He whispered one word. "No." The entire church fell silent. My mother looked equally shocked. Olivia stood frozen beside the altar. No one moved, no one spoke. Finally, my father took a slow step forward. "What are you doing here?" Margaret answered softly. "I think it's time the truth stopped hiding." A wave of whispers spread across the room. Dad looked terrified. Not angry, terrified. I had never seen that expression on his face before. He looked at me, then back at Margaret. His voice cracked. "You shouldn't have brought him." She didn't raise her voice. I didn't. He chose to come. I stared between them, completely confused. "What is everyone talking about?" No one answered. Finally, Dad looked directly into my eyes. There were tears forming. "Ethan." For the first time in my life, my father looked like a man carrying a burden too heavy to bear. "There are things about our family." My dad texted me, "Don't come to your sister's wedding." Then he saw who walked in beside me. Part 2. The silence inside the church was unbearable. No one dared to speak. I looked at my father, waiting for him to explain what was happening, but he couldn't even meet my eyes. His hands trembled as though he had just seen a ghost. "Dad," I said quietly, "who is she?" He swallowed hard. "This isn't the place." Margaret stepped forward. "No, David, this is exactly the place. You've spent 28 years hiding the truth. How much longer were you planning to run?" My father's face turned pale. My mother slowly walked toward us, her eyes filled with confusion. "David," she whispered. "Who is this woman?" He closed his eyes. "I was going to tell you." "When?" Mom asked, her voice shaking. After another 20 years? Guests exchanged nervous glances. Some quietly slipped into the pews while others stood frozen, unsure whether the wedding was still happening. Olivia finally broke the silence. Dad, please tell us what's going on. He looked at both of us, then lowered his head. Everyone deserves the truth. The church became so quiet that I could hear the air conditioning humming. When I was 23, Dad began, I was engaged before I met your mother. I stared at him. What? He nodded slowly. Margaret and I were supposed to get married. Every word felt impossible to believe. I loved her, he continued, more than anything. Margaret looked down at the old photograph in her hands. But 1 week before the wedding, Dad said, my father threatened to cut me out of the family business if I married her. The room remained silent. He said she came from the wrong family. He wanted me to marry someone with money and influence. My grandfather, the man I had always admired. I suddenly remembered how controlling he had been when I was younger. Dad continued. I was weak. His voice cracked. I chose security instead of love. Margaret nodded sadly. You never even came to say goodbye. Dad couldn't answer, she continued. I waited at the church for 3 hours. Several guests wiped tears from their eyes. I thought you'd been in an accident. She smiled sadly. Instead, you disappeared. Dad covered his face. I'm sorry. I know you are. I looked between them, still trying to understand. But what does this have to do with me? Margaret's eyes met mine. Everything. My heart raced. She reached into her purse again and removed a faded envelope. I've carried this with me for nearly 30 years. She handed it to my father. His hand shook so badly he almost dropped it. I never opened it, she said. You should. Dad slowly unfolded the yellowed letter. As he read the first few lines, tears streamed down his face. Oh my God, Mom stepped closer. What is it? He couldn't speak. Margaret answered instead. It was the last letter I wrote him. I looked at the paper. What does it say? Dad finally managed to whisper the words. David, if you're reading this, it's because you finally found the courage to face the past. By the time this reaches you, our child will already be born. The church gasped. My entire body froze. Our child? Dad nodded slowly, unable to look at anyone. I never received the letter. Margaret's eyes filled with tears. Your father made sure you never would. My grandfather, Agan. He intercepted every letter I sent. Dad looked completely broken. I never knew. You were supposed to. Margaret took a deep breath. I raised our son alone. The room erupted with whispers. I could barely hear them. One sentence echoed inside my mind. I raised our son alone. There was another child, another son, somewhere. Dad looked around desperately. Where is he? Margaret smiled softly. You've already met him. Everyone turned toward the church entrance. A man in his late 20s stepped inside. He looked almost exactly like my father when he was younger. The resemblance was unbelievable. His dark hair, his eyes, even the way he walked. Dad stared in disbelief. No, the young man stopped a few feet away. My name is Noah. Dad whispered it as though testing whether it was real. Noah, I've imagined this moment my entire life. Noah wasn't angry, he wasn't smiling either. He simply looked exhausted. I didn't come here to ruin Olivia's wedding. He looked toward my sister. I'm sorry. Olivia, tears running down her face, shook her head. You don't have to apologize. Dad slowly stepped forward. I never knew you existed. I believe you. You do? Noah nodded. My mother showed me every letter she wrote. He looked directly at Dad. You answered none of them. I never received them. For several seconds, neither man moved. Then Noah quietly asked the question that had haunted him his entire life. Did you ever wonder about us? Dad broke down completely, every single day. The words echoed through the church. I thought Margaret hated me. I deserved that. I never imagined. His voice disappeared into sobs. That I had a son. Noah's eyes filled with tears, so did I. For the first time, the distance between them seemed to disappear. Dad reached out cautiously. I know I don't deserve to ask this, he paused. But may I hug you? Noah stood motionless. The entire church waited, then, slowly, he nodded. Dad wrapped his arms around him and cried harder than I'd ever seen in my life. Guests quietly wiped away tears. Even people who had never met Noah were crying. I stood there watching my father embrace the son he never knew he had, a brother I never knew existed. But something still didn't make sense. If this was the secret, why had Dad told me not to come to the wedding? Who had sent that message, and why did it feel like the real truth still hadn't been revealed? Just then, a familiar voice came from the back of the church. You still don't know everything. Every head turned toward the entrance. Standing there was my Uncle Richard. His expression was cold, and in his hand was my father's phone. My dad texted me, "Don't come to your sister's wedding." Then he saw who walked in beside me. Part 3, Final. The entire church turned toward the entrance. My Uncle Richard stood in the doorway, holding my father's phone. His expression was calm, almost proud. "You've all been blaming the wrong man," he said. My father wiped the tears from his face. "Richard, what are you talking about?" Richard slowly walked down the aisle. I sent the text. A wave of shock swept through the church. I felt my heart pounding. What? He held up Dad's phone. "Your father left this in my office yesterday while we were discussing the wedding. It wasn't difficult to unlock." Dad stared at him in disbelief. "You texted Ethan?" Richard nodded. "I also deleted every missed call afterward." My fists clenched. "Why?" He laughed bitterly. "Because everything was falling apart." Everyone watched in silence. Richard looked at Noah. "The moment she contacted your father again, I knew the truth would come out." He pointed toward Margaret. "And once the truth came out, our family's reputation would be destroyed." Dad shook his head. "So you tried to keep Ethan away?" "I needed fewer witnesses." Mom stepped forward. "You lied to all of us." Richard didn't even deny it. "I've been protecting this family for years." Margaret looked at him with sadness. "No, Richard, you've been protecting yourself." He smiled coldly. "You still don't understand." Then he turned toward the guests. My father never intercepted Margaret's letters. Everyone looked confused. Richard continued. "I did." The church fell silent. Dad looked as though the ground had disappeared beneath him. Richard nodded. "I found every letter before Father ever saw them." Margaret gasped. "You told me David didn't care." "I did." Dad's voice shook with anger. "You told me Margaret had moved away and married someone else." "I did. You stole 28 years from us." Richard didn't answer. Instead, he looked at Noah. "If your father had known about you, he would have inherited everything." My father froze. "The business." Richard smiled. "Exactly." Grandfather had planned to leave the company to David. But if David reunited with Margaret, he shrugged. "I would have gotten nothing." The truth finally came together. It had never been about love. It had never been about family honor. It had been greed. Richard had manipulated everyone, dyed lives, separated a father from his son, and nearly destroyed another family to keep his secret hidden. Dad walked toward him slowly. For a moment I thought he might lose control. Instead, he simply asked one question. Was it worth it? Richard looked around the church. No one stood beside him, not one relative, not one friend, only silence. For the first time, confidence disappeared from his face. He couldn't finish. Dad took a deep breath. "I spent 28 years believing I had abandoned the woman I loved." He looked at Noah. "I lost every birthday, every Christmas, every school play, every graduation." His voice cracked. "I can never get those years back." Noah stepped closer. "No, you can't." Dad lowered his head. "I'm so sorry." Noah looked at him for several long seconds. "I can't erase the past either." He smiled sadly. But we still have today. Dad looked up. And maybe, Noah continued, we still have tomorrow. Without another word, they embraced again. This time it wasn't a reunion between strangers. It was the beginning of a relationship. Olivia walked over and hugged Noah. I guess. She laughed through her tears. I have an older brother. Noah smiled. And I have a little sister. Everyone laughed softly. The tension that had filled the church finally began to disappear. Then Olivia looked at the pastor. I've waited long enough. She smiled. I still want to get married. The guests applauded. The ceremony continued. But this time something had changed. The wedding was no longer just about two people beginning a new life. It had become the day an entire family found its way back together. After the ceremony, Dad asked Noah to stand beside him for the family photographs. At first, Noah hesitated. I don't want to replace Ethan. I smiled and wrapped an arm around his shoulder. You can't replace someone who's been waiting to meet you. For the first time that day, Noah laughed. The photographer called everyone together. Dad stood in the center. Mom stood beside him, gently holding his hand. Olivia and her new husband smiled at the camera. Margaret stood quietly near the end. Dad noticed. He walked over. You belong here too. She looked surprised. Are you sure? He nodded. You've always belonged. She joined the family picture. The photographer counted. 3, 2, 1. The camera flashed. A brand new family portrait was created. Not because the past had been forgotten, but because everyone had chosen forgiveness over resentment. Several months later, Dad sold his share of the family business. Instead of chasing wealth, he chose something far more valuable: time. Every Sunday, our family gathered for dinner. Noah came every week. Sometimes Margaret came too. The conversations were awkward at first. Then they became comfortable. Then they became something we'd all missed for years. A family. One evening, Dad handed me the same phone that had once delivered the message that broke my heart. I almost lost everything because of one lie, he said. I never want silence to replace truth again. I nodded. Neither did I. As we sat around the dinner table, laughing over stories we'd never had the chance to share, I realized something. Families aren't defined by perfect histories. They're defined by the courage to face the truth, ask for forgiveness, and choose each other even after years of pain. That wedding wasn't remembered because of the flowers or the music.